The next war on Alberta's natural resources is heating up. This time, the province, with a lot of help from the federal government, is using the Woodland Caribou as a roadblock to Alberta prosperity. There was just a rally at the Alberta legislature organized in conjunction with a forest industry association called the Alberta Forest Alliance. Now, the ralliers want the Alberta government to re-examine their draft caribou policy. This is a really big issue. I'm going to try to give you the Coles Notes version with as much information as I can. And I want you to hear from the people this draft caribou plan is affecting the most. Woodland caribou populations across the country are declining. That's a fact. So in response to that, the federal government called upon the individual provinces who are in charge of the land these caribou live on to create a plan to save the woodland caribou that would require at least 65% of woodland caribou ranges to be left completely undisturbed. So, in late December, Alberta introduced their draft woodland caribou plan. The province will be spending $85 million over the next 5 years to restore caribou habitat by eliminating seismic lines and lease roads and by building maternity pens and fences to keep predators out. Preliminary plans from the government set aside 1.8 million hectares for permanent protection in Alberta's northwest corner, which amounts to a 38% reduction in available land base for forestry. The protection of these lands could also make them off limits for oil and gas and for agriculture too. So in response, 6 northwestern municipalities formed the Northwest Species at Risk Committee to develop an alternative plan which doesn't involve turning huge portions of Alberta into an off-limits provincial park. The committee said the province's proposed plan could result in 640 jobs lost just in the forestry sector alone and hundreds more in oil and gas. Of course, environmentalist groups say the province's plan doesn't go far enough because these delicious woodland ruminants are their way to block both forestry and oil and gas development in vast tracts of resource-rich northern Alberta. But the people who live and work in the area encompassed by caribou ranges are outraged, and they say they're left out of the conversation. They feel there's a way to better balance protection of the caribou with jobs, prosperity, and resource development in their communities. They say the provincial government is going to devastate their towns by sterilizing caribou ranges of resource development, chasing away thousands of much-needed local jobs. So, people from all across the north converged on the Alberta legislature, demanding that the Alberta government stand up for their jobs against the federal government's demands for a caribou protection plan. I did something the NDP didn't do, and I ventured into that crowd of Albertans to listen to their concerns. Here.
They want to eradicate all industry out of it, which is going to cost taxpayers billions of dollars. And there's also going to have to be compensation to all the companies that are involved, which is going to be billions of dollars. And who's going to pay for that? It's going to be the taxpayers.
Do you think that not enough attention is being paid to forestry by the NDP?
Absolutely not. They don't get it at all. They need to pay attention to us.
If they go ahead with this draft plan, it means we're going to lose 300,000 cubic meters to our mill, which means we could shut down a shift. That's 100 people, direct jobs, just at our mill. That's going to affect my job. I live there. I've lived there my whole life. My dad has his business there. My stepfather has his business there. If the mill in Whitecourt collapses, the town doesn't exist.
Well, it's important for us to make sure the government hears our side of the story, that it's important to protect both caribou and jobs, and we can't look at this topic in a vacuum. And we want to just make sure that they represent us as well as they're representing some of the other special interests.
The job loss would be very vast if the plan were to go through, and that would greatly affect my community, my friends in the community, and the community that I would return to after going to school. So that's a big deal to me and my family.
If the same amount of jobs were being lost in Edmonton, if we expanded it so that it was the same percentage of unemployment, do you think the government would take notice?
Absolutely they would. 100,000 jobs in Edmonton, Alberta, I think they'd be panicking. But of course, when it's small northern communities, they don't think it's going to affect them. It is. Oil and gas is a huge contributor to our economy in Alberta and all throughout Canada. If oil and gas, combined with carbon tax and this caribou and how hard it is to access the resources in Alberta, they're going to pull out.
Do you expect the NDP to come out and listen to you today?
I would expect them to come out and address the crowd and ask them why we're losing the jobs that we're losing.
There was 105 students in my grade, 52 of which have parents that are directly employed by forestry and oil and gas, and 38 have parents in support jobs of the oil and gas and forestry industries. So that leaves only 15 students who would not be affected in my grade.
You know what? Our kids are important to our future, and you know, we're here representing logging contractors and families. And you know what? Without work, we don't have families, and that's what we're here for, right? You want to show her your sign?
No one, not one person from the NDP came out to meet with these people, some of which had driven over 10 hours one way just to stand up on the steps of the legislature and be heard. But credit where it's due, and it pains me to do this, I was pleasantly surprised to see the union representing forestry workers actually show up on the side of their own members instead of showing up on behalf of the NDP for once. Woodland caribou populations across the country are in decline. That's not in disagreement. Nobody really knows why, they just are. So I thought I would take a look at the numbers using the Environmentalist's own data so we can really understand what's going on here. In fact, I use the same numbers the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society uses to constantly push for more protected caribou land. Since 2004, the Banff North Mountain caribou herd has gone extinct. That herd was 5 members strong. It was also in a national park where there's no hunting or oil and gas development. The South Jasper Mountain herd dropped from 87 animals down to 51 in just 5 years. That herd also in a national park where there's no hunting or oil and gas development. So the animals that are existing in parks where there's no oil and gas development and no hunting are still declining drastically. So why on earth would the government think that turning more Alberta land into park status is going to save the rest of the animals? That's clearly not the solution, because we can see it just isn't working. And economically speaking, the Little Smoky Boreal herd is probably the most stable herd, with 80 animals in 2004 and 78 animals 10 years later. But if the government does what it intends to do in the Little Smoky area to protect those 78 animals, it could mean a $2 billion loss in economic development and 1,000 jobs, 640 of those right off the hop. $2 billion, 1,000 jobs for 78 caribou that will likely continue to decline in population despite all efforts to save them. Those are some pretty expensive ungulates you got there. What environmentalists won't tell you is that the caribou is the most abundant wild hoofed animal in Canada. 3.89 million caribou are spread across the country. There are more caribou than deer, moose, and elk combined. And what about that subspecies of woodland caribou that everybody seems to be lighting their hair on fire about? There are 1.28 million of those in Canada, hardly something to be worried about, wouldn't you say? So environmentalists further divided that population into forest tundra types and forest dwelling types with no real biological difference except where they live. The forest dwelling type is the one that's in decline. If you divide any species down far enough, you'll get some pretty small numbers based on arbitrary differences, and that's exactly what's happening here. Environmentalists divided and divided until they got a small enough number that conveniently lives where we make the oil and harvest the lumber. Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec are going to decimate their own forestry industries at the behest of the federal government and Environment Minister Catherine McKenna, because the federal government has already divided a highly populous animal into a bizarre subset based on where they live alone and then designated that population protected. Let's be real here. We know it's not about the caribou. These people don't care about the caribou, just like the spirit bear or the orca. These animals are simply a means to an end, a tool for environmentalists. And the end is stopping Canadian natural resources from being harvested and getting to international markets. And the Alberta government is just all too eager to help them do it. For the Rebel.media, I'm Sheila Gunreed. Fake news, misinformation, and liberal bias is everywhere. But I've got some good news because so are we. The Rebel Media has a brand new mobile app. It's available on the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. Download it, give it a whirl, and take the other side of the story with you wherever you go.